Very good day, everybody. We will discuss the essay paper of Mains 2021. The paper that has generated plenty of comments on social media, plenty of controversy, many people saying that it was very, very out of the way. Many people saying it was more philosophy than typical essays that UPSC asks. Many people saying that the paper helps people with PSIR or sociology or philosophy optionals. Many people saying that we do not want to become philosophers, we want to become civil servants, and so on and so forth. Typically, what the UPSC has done is what they are trying to do over a period of time, making the essay paper and many other papers as well thinking based rather than knowledge based. Now, UPSC has said in its guidelines that it is looking at well educated people who have a broad understanding of issues. Now, the moment you reduce the essay paper into a philosophy optional, PSIR optional, and so on and so forth, you are missing the point that an essay has to be general based on your understanding of the topic. Never mind whether you know the context of the topic or not. It's about how you understand it and how you end up writing it. I have in various other videos, in various other talks, talked about how to structure an essay. So I will not go into that here. I will just try to help you understand why the controversy generated by this paper is actually not necessary, and how to approach an essay topic, especially of the so-called philosophical abstract variety, where you actually have no idea about the context of the statement, and how to try to understand the topic and be able to write well. Now, to do that, let's first see the topics that were given this time: 4 in topic A, in part A, 4 in part B, and as usual you have to attempt 1 from A and 1 from B. Part A, 4 topics. The process of self-discovery has now been technologically outsourced. Second, your perception of me is a reflection of you. My reaction to you is an awareness of me. Philosophy of wantlessness is utopian, while materialism is a chimera. And 4, the real is rational, the rational is real. Let me repeat the topics a bit more slowly for better understanding. The process of self-discovery has now been technologically outsourced. Your perception of me is a reflection of you. My reaction to you is an awareness of me. Philosophy of wantlessness is utopian, while materialism is a chimera. And 4, the real is rational, the rational is real. So that is part A for you. Part B, hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Number 2, what is research but a blind date with knowledge? Number 3, history repeats itself first as a tragedy, then as a farce. And 4, there are better practices to best practices. I repeat, hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. What is research but a blind date with knowledge? History repeats itself first as a tragedy, then as a farce. And 4, there are better practices to best practices. Now, all the topics look rather philosophical. The good part is that you have to pick up only 2 out of the 4, one from part A, the other from part B. Now, what exactly is this paper about? It's about understanding the topic even without knowing the actual context. That is the major part of what I am trying to say. Now, essay is actually part of the GS part of the exam. It does not require very specialized knowledge. It requires understanding of the topic, and ultimately the marks will be based on your understanding and of the way you write, your writing skills. So, one, it is about understanding the topic. Second is about writing skills. Third is about following UPSC guidelines, most importantly. Fourth is about correct choice of topic. What do UPSC guidelines say? They say that you kindly understand the topic, stick to the topic, write in a logical sequence, and write to the point. Now, writing to the point might become difficult in these so-called abstract kind of topics, and yet if you understand the topic, sticking to the point becomes easy. Correct choice of topic. How do you choose a correct topic? While you're reading the topics, the one that connects to you immediately is normally the one with which one is comfortable. Any topic which you have to read more than once, 2, 3, 4, 5 times to understand is a topic that can comfortably be avoided. So, I repeat, any topic that immediately connects to your mind is usually the right choice to write the essay on. Any topic which takes time to understand is at best avoided. Now, this paper, apart from the things that I pointed out, is also, because it is based on your understanding. Now remember, we will all understand it differently. So now the question arises, then what is the right essay? What is the right way to write these kind of essays when they are based on understanding and everybody is liable to understand the topic differently? Now, to understand the essay, I'll come to when I take up the topics one by one. But more importantly, I repeat, what connects to you immediately is the right choice of the essay. It does not matter whether you understand it differently from me or I understand it differently from you. It is, as long as you get the broad meaning of the topic, that should do. How you explain the topic, whether with examples or without examples or pure theory, etc., is entirely up to your writing skill. But there would be no particular right way to write these kind of essays. They will depend purely on your understanding of the topic. And then, now many people ask a question about what dimensions to put. Where I am concerned, it can be unidimensional, it can be 2 dimensions, it can be multidimensional, the dimensions can be positive, dimensions can be negative, dimensions can be balanced. Now again, many people ask whether a balanced essay is the right way to do it. My answer has always been that it will depend on the topic of the essay. If you take a particular direction in the beginning, try to stick to that direction, because if you try to balance it out artificially, if it balances naturally, well and good, but if you try to balance it out artificially, it's very easy for the examiner to see that you are doing something artificial which does not really connect to what you are trying to say. So best avoided. I repeat, it will depend on the topic of the essay, what dimension to take. The good thing about this paper, you have to write 2 essays, one from part A, one from part B, both about 1000 to 1200 words, meaning at best you are writing 2400 words, unlike the GS papers where you have to write at the minimum about 3500 words. So a huge advantage, one is a very wide choice, second is the word count, third is that the time is the same as other GS papers, which means you get a lot of time to think on both the topics, structure your essay and start writing. It will of course all depend on your understanding of the topic, and therefore I'll now come to the topics one by one and I will try to explain the essays from a general point of view where the aspirant does not really have knowledge of the context or of the exact meaning of the essay. Because if people know, the matter ends, but if they don't, what do they do? Now, this particular topic, if you notice, is not really philosophy. Similar things have been asked in the ethics paper, I think more than once. It is partly about what technology is doing today. It is about self-discovery. Self-discovery meaning understanding oneself. Who am I? Now, in the early days, before technology became so advanced, we have the internet and the social media and multiple online platforms. How would one discover oneself? If you look back at history, we have had great philosophers, great thinkers, great writers who have said that self-discovery comes from introspection. Meaning, I think, therefore I am. I introspect. I try to understand myself. And the understanding, self-discovery, it used to come from within, because I would think about who am I, what am I doing, where's my life leading, what do I want, what is achievement in my personal context, and so on and so forth. Over time, the self-discovery, now we all know this part, many of us are dependent wholly solely on social media for our self-worth. Our self-worth comes from what we portray to others through social media, and portraying ourselves to others has become very, very easy. That is why technologically outsourced. My own personality has become less important than my online personality. Now, my self-worth earlier was based on my own introspection about myself. Who am I? Whether I am a good human being, bad human being, what am I trying to achieve, where is my life going, where should my life go, and so on and so forth. Self-worth came from self-discovery. Now, unfortunately, my self-discovery is dependent on what I want others to perceive me. And that has become very, very easy, as I've said, because technologically outsourced, because technology has provided me with innumerable platforms. And sadly, over time, what has happened is that my own personality, my own self-discovery has become less important. What has become more important is how people perceive me, to the extent that even if my online personality is false, over time, I start tending to believe that that is my real self. Meaning that my real self is overshadowed by my social media self. And I actually start believing that this is social media self is the real me. I do not really need to introspect. As long as people believe what I portray becomes very, very important. It overshadows my true personality. Having said that, to take the essay further, you can give multiple examples, because most of you are already on social media. Multiple examples of how people portray what they are not. Meaning, leading to a question: am I what I am not? And the answer, if you introspect, if you self-discover, the answer will be certainly not. It's not possible. And yet technology has ensured that I start believing I am, what I am not. Now, outsourcing self-discovery, in this case to technology, from my point of view, again, as I said, these essays are a matter of one's own understanding. There is no right essay or wrong essay. As long as I broadly get the meaning right of the topic, I am on the right track. And then, as I said, you can give maybe 1-2 examples of how the younger generation, maybe your own generation, has been taken over, many with multiple exceptions, of course, but how the social media has become more important. In fact, even in terms of relationships, for example. There was a time when relationships were based on what I am, what I believe I am, and whether the other person is compatible, etc. Here I am talking about a narrow example of a romantic relationship, for example. Now you have instant dating apps where the self does not really matter. What matters is what is portrayed. Thereby, you can give an example of now, there was a time when people would enter into relationships to discover themselves and helping the other person to discover himself or herself. Now, that has taken a back seat because technology has ensured that the online portrayal of what I want to be is more than enough. It's easy to lie, it's easy to camouflage, it's easy to, if I use a stronger word, cheat, it's easy to fraud, and it's essentially very, very easy that your relationships get based on very, very weak foundations because there is no self-discovery involved here. The other paragraphs could include how technology has finally done this. You could use some, as I said earlier, you could use examples of certain apps. You could use examples of Facebook and Instagram and so many others. I personally would believe that if I am on this particular track, my understanding of the topic is by and large clear, and once I believe that my understanding of the topic is by and large clear, I think I will be able to arrive at a very, very meaningful essay. So do focus on understanding of the topic. Now remember, in this particular essay, simply understanding this is not enough. Simply understanding this is not enough. The interconnection is important. I have to be able to connect self-discovery with technology. I have to be able to say that self-discovery was earlier a matter of introspection, about understanding myself. Now, because of technology, it has become my understanding of me based on my personality that has gone online. And this kind of outsourcing is has a very, very fragile base. It will not stay if I lose myself into my other self, which is not my real self. Coming to the second topic, your perception of me is a reflection of you. My reaction to you is an awareness of me. Now recall ethics. Now ethics is something that all of you have studied, irrespective of whether you have PSI or optional or philosophy or sociology, etc. This is directly picked up from the ethics paper. It is about emotional intelligence. It is about socialization. Both topics directly from the essay paper. Now recall, in emotional intelligence, it was understanding oneself to be able to understand others. The very broad definition of emotional intelligence. Socialization, how we grow up, including not only how we grow up. While growing up, now as I said, I believe that this particular topic is directly based on your knowledge of ethics, and ethics is not limited to what optional you have. We all have to study ethics for GS4. Your perception of me is a reflection of you. My reaction to you is an awareness of me. We understand each other based on our perception. Perception is based on our attitudes and values, directly picked up from GS4. Emotional intelligence actually defines this very well, that understanding myself to understand others. This could have come as a question in ethics in about, say, let's say 200-250 words. It could have come as a quote which you had to elaborate upon, on, or explain. The only difference is here it has come in the form of an essay. I would perhaps start by saying that perception is what matters, to the extent that perception also becomes reality, because perception is based on attitudes and values. I perceive somebody based on my attitude towards things, my attitude towards that person, and the values that I consider important in my own life. For example, my attitude or my perception about your caste would be based upon my attitudes and values. My perception about you as a person would again be based on this. My perception about your looks would again be based on this. My perception about whether you're a great person or not such a great person would again be based on this. And attitudes, values, and emotional intelligence is what defines this particular topic. In socialization part of sociology, of ethics, where it talks, the syllabus talks about the role of family, etc. in bringing you up. There is a concept called looking glass self, meaning how I look at others, how others look at me. Therefore, society becomes your looking glass self. It becomes a mirror about how you are defined and how you define others. Now, I'm repeating myself. It's directly picked up from the GS4 paper. You can give examples of how we perceive social issues, for example. Me and you can be in terms of individuals. Me and you can be in terms of people at large. Me and you can also be in terms of issues that society faces. Now, at an individual level, how do I enter into relationships with friends, with a soulmate, with my office colleagues, with people in a coaching institute, and so on and so forth. It's all based on you suddenly realize that you like somebody. Somebody realizes that he or she also likes you. But how does that happen? Without going into the detailed science of it, because I perceive that that person and I can get along well. And that happens because we find common tastes, common backgrounds, common way of looking at things, and so on and so forth. It can also be, as I said, the second level, people at large. People of a certain country are bad. People belonging to a certain religion are not good. People of certain ethnicity are different from us, and so on and so forth. And at the third level, so one is at the individual level, second is at people level or society level, third is at issues level. Now, issues also which concern you and me or people at large. Caste could be one. Now, caste has come in your paper 4 and I think paper 1. Now, issues could be caste, could be religion, could be somebody's background, could be the money somebody has, could be the education somebody has had, and so on and so forth. Now, this essay I personally thought was relatively simple, provided you were able to connect it to ethics, especially to emotional intelligence, especially to attitudes, and especially to values, and part in the ethics syllabus about how family, etc., and institutions shape us. Coming to the third one, again broadly ethics. Two opposing poles, I want nothing, is wantlessness. I want everything is materialism. Now, the topic says that both of them are only a dream. Utopia is a dreamland. Chimera is a non-existent mythological animal in Greek mythology. Meaning, in this case, it also means temporary, in the sense that suppose you acquire all the wealth on this earth, then what? You and I will die like each other. You and I will have very similar lives at a personal level, except that you have a lot of money and I don't. At the very basic level, we are human beings. Now, back to the topic. The topic basically says that both are not achievable. This one has a slightly deeper meaning. As I said, it's only a dreamland. Philosophy of wantlessness is utopian. How can a human being not want anything? Even people who decided that they want nothing, Gautam Buddha, for example, he said that to achieve nirvana, you kill desire, and to kill desire, you follow the Eightfold Path. Without going into the details of need, want, and desire in detail, except that need is something very basic. We all need food, clothing, and shelter. Want is a little above that. If I have a one-room house, I want a two-room house. If I have a bike, I want a car. Desire is taking want to the extreme. In the sense that if I have a car, I want a Mercedes-Benz. If I have a Mercedes-Benz, I want a Rolls-Royce. And after a point, desire becomes a show. Now, philosophy of wantlessness. Now, want is something very peculiar to human beings, because I can consciously want things. An animal needs food. I might want certain kinds of food. I might desire some foods which are far beyond my reach. So, the philosophy of wantlessness is utopian. I would agree with this because wantlessness is against human nature. We all want something. Even Gautam Buddha wanted to achieve nirvana, for example. Without that want, the nirvana could not have been achieved. We want the basic needs. Connect the two. I want food, clothing, and shelter because I need them. Because I need them, I might need something more than what I already have, and it goes on and on and on. And desire finally turns to greed. Now, wantlessness, I would have stuck to the point that wantlessness is utopian because it is against human nature. It cannot exist. Many things that human beings have tried to achieve are actually utopian, and as long as they are beyond our reach, they remain a utopia. I repeat, wanting something is the beginning of human nature. A child wants love. A grown-up wants things more than love. Let me take it to a very basic level of sex. Now, sex is a want or a need or a desire. Now, sex, for example, in other animal forms, barring I think dolphins, is something very mechanical. In human beings, it covers all of these. And that is why I would have stuck to my point that philosophy of wantlessness is utopian, while materialism is a chimera. Materialism, acquisition, being acquisitive. I want this, I want that, I want everything. Back here. Now it is also it is something that is very, very temporary. Even if I achieve a lot of materialism, etc., a lot of material goods, then what? And as I said, both go against each other. Because we are acquisitive in nature, that is why wantlessness can't exist. But because we are acquisitive in nature, materialism does exist. But materialism is a false sense of security. That is what a chimera here means, something false, something that is not correct, something that is not true. Materialism is at a very, very superficial level. The problem is that not many people think, then what? Now, for example, yesterday I was reading how pharmaceutical companies actually sell banned drugs, actually sell drugs that are harmful and make billions of dollars in profit. Now, then what? This is a question that we miss out on. We miss out on the fact that materialism is something very, very fallacious. It's very, very superficial, and beyond a point, it loses meaning. In spite of the fact that it is based on the idea of need, want, desire, finally leading to greed. Now, I might have ended my essay by saying, if this is utopian and if this materialism is a fallacy, then what? My conclusion would have been here a middle ground. Middle ground where I need to distinguish between this, and this. But throughout the essay, I would not have tried to balance it out, except in the concluding part. I would have focused more on that wantlessness is something that can't be achieved. Materialism, even if achieved, material acquisition, etc., even if achieved, it's a fallacy. It's something very superficial. It does not define you. So therefore, the middle ground is the ideal ground. The middle ground being when we clearly learn to distinguish between need, want, desire, and greed. And that is how we achieve a balance between the two. And why so? Simply because we are humans. We are Homo sapiens, or in literal terms, the wise ones. If we are the wise ones, Homo sapiens means wise ones. If we are the wise ones, we have a choice of how to balance between the two, because this is not really possible, because it's against innate human nature, and materialism is something very superficial. It's a chimera, it is a fallacy. Coming to the last topic of part A. The real is rational, the rational is real. Now we have to understand what real means, what rational means. Now, to some people, reality would be what people see, what people can, in fact, more broadly, what people can perceive through their senses. I can see this is a building, so it is real. I can see that I am talking to you, so you are real. You can see that I am talking to you, so I am real. I can see that this is a screen, because these are the things I can perceive through my five senses. But rational can't be perceived through senses. Rational is thought. Now, or ideas. Now, are these real, or are these real, or are both real? If I stick to my definition that real is what I perceive through my senses, that's one way of looking at it. Rational is my thoughts and ideas, meaning, and do the two interconnect? And if thoughts and ideas are rational, meaning I make sense of my reality through my thoughts and ideas, then the rational becomes the real and the real becomes the rational. I hope you are getting my point. Many of you recently would have read the books by Yuval Harari, where he talks about something called imagined reality. Now it sounds like a contradiction in terms. Imagined reality, either it's imagination or it is real. Can it be both? I'll give you 1-2 examples here to be able to connect to the topic. Now, is caste real? I can't see caste. It doesn't have a physical form. Can I see religion? I can't. I can see that a Hindu prays to certain kinds of gods and goddesses, a Muslim goes to a mosque, a Christian goes to a church, a Hindu reads, let's say, the Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, a Muslim reads the Quran, the Christian reads the Bible. But I can't see religion as an idea. Similarly, education. I can see schools, I can see colleges, I can see books, I can understand what is taught. But can I see education in its complete form? Certainly not. Now, and yet, these are real. They exist. But where do they exist? In our minds. We try to rationalize many of these things. Now, caste by itself has got nothing negative about it. It's just a division of society. But caste, the idea of caste crossing a line becomes something very, very negative. Religion by itself, whether Hindu, Muslim, Christian or any religion, nothing wrong with it. It assumes dangerous proportions when religion turns to communalism. Education, as I said, the idea of education is something that we can't really destroy or create, in the sense, let me give you an example. Let's say if we remove all caste symbols, including, let's say, the Brahmins wear their thread, for example. Let's say we remove all religious symbols, we destroy every temple, church and mosque. Let's say we destroy every school, college and burn every book that we have. Will it destroy these? Can caste be destroyed by destroying caste symbols? Can religion be destroyed by demolishing temples, churches and mosques, or by burning of the holy books? Can education be destroyed by destroying schools and colleges and universities, and by burning books and killing of teachers? Certainly not. These are ideas. And these ideas are rational ideas to many people. Now, religion, for example, many philosophers believe that religion brings some kind of social unity. Many people believe that caste by itself, there is nothing wrong with the division of society on certain lines. It only becomes a problem when a particular line is crossed. Education can be good or bad, etc., but education is also there to stay. Now, how I reason is my rational part. How I perceive is based on my reason. Now, this is a building. You know it and I know it. What kind of a building is it? It's a commercial building because downstairs is a bank, upstairs there are some offices, upstairs here is IS Baba. I am perceiving it through my senses because I can see it, I can feel it, I'm standing there. But if I take it at a higher level based on this topic, how do I know it is a building? Somebody told me. Did I learn to call this thing a building? Or somewhere in my mind, this is a building. We rationalize things. This is a building because it is made of brick, cement and mortar. This is a building because it has a structure. It is a building because it has a certain purpose that buildings are supposed to achieve. It's a multi-storied building because there are many floors. It's a commercial building that because every floor is commercial. Now I'm seeing it, perceiving it through my senses, and at a rational level actually figuring out that this is a building. And that is why the topic of this is extremely apt, that you can't distinguish between the two. The actual statement, I think, is by the philosopher Hegel, a very different context, but I told you that I am not going into the context. I am talking about people with a general idea, without knowing the context of the topic, without knowing where it came from, how they perceive the topic, and right is more important. Now here again, I said how you perceive the topic. One, you can read it. The real is rational, the rational is real. But unless you understand it, you don't get the meaning. If you don't get the meaning, you can't write. Therefore, the interconnection is extremely obvious. Now, this ends part A of the essay paper. Now I repeat, I am not talking about structuring an essay and so on and so forth, because I've done it in my earlier videos. I am trying to only understand the topics even where I have no specialized knowledge of the context. I have no specialized knowledge of which philosopher said what. I have no specialized knowledge of whether it is an economic concept, whether it's a philosophical concept, whether it's a sociological concept or what. I am only trying to base my essay on my understanding, and I repeat that these kind of topics, everybody's understanding may be different. Ultimately, if your understanding is connected to the topic, if you have broadly understood it and you have written well, therein lies the key. And now I'll take up part B of the essay. Now coming to part B of the essay paper, topic 1 being hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. To my mind, not very difficult to derive a meaning from this one. It's actually based on a poem written by a poet called Wallace, I think, way back in 1865. Clearly about motherhood. Rules the world would mean now there are multiple quotations about mothers being the foundation of civilization, mothers being the people in a person's life who shape that person's destiny, mothers being the first point of contact after a child is born, mothers being the first agent of socialization in the bringing up a child, and it is a child, as the child grows, his or her destiny is shaped. Destinies of children ultimately shape the world, so indirectly it is the mother that rules the world. Hand that rocks the cradle is the swing in which infants are put to sleep. The poem that I mentioned is also about motherhood itself. Now the idea of motherhood, goes far beyond your mother or my mother or my children and my wife. If you recall, we call Mother Nature, Mother Earth, Motherland. The idea of motherhood goes far beyond, as I said, your mother or my mother or human mother, and it also goes far beyond humans. It also goes to other animal forms as well. And the idea of motherhood is so ingrained in us that anything that nurtures us, anything that helps us survive, anything that makes our life comfortable, anything that we feel affiliated or connected to, we give the title of Mother. Mother Nature, Mother Earth, Motherland are the immediate words that come to my mind. But why does the hand that rocks the cradle, why does the mother rule the world? I have already said, because mothers are the first point of contact when the infant is born. It is the first point of contact where an infant connects with another human being. The sense of touch for an infant is very, very important. The first person that is touched is the mother after the child comes out of the womb. It is the mother's milk on which the child is nurtured in the early days. The first word normally that a child learns to speak is Ma. The mother brings a smile on the infant's face. The mother looks after the child. In fact, in almost every society, the role of the mother in bringing up a child is much, much more well defined, clear, and demanded from the mother than of the father. It is also about women, that without a woman there can be no world. Without a woman there can't be you, there can't be me. If there can't be you and there can't be me, there can't be the world as we see it today. And because my mother shaped my destiny in bringing me up right from my infancy, and she remained a primary focus of my life throughout my life till her death. Obviously, it is not only about rocking the cradle, it goes far beyond. And hand that rocks the cradle means the entire upbringing of a child that a mother is involved in on a very, very minute level. Whether it's talking to an infant even when the infant doesn't understand what she is saying, about bringing a smile on the infant's face, about feeding the child at the appropriate time, about changing the clothes of an infant when they are dirty, about teaching a child how to walk, how to talk, about teaching a child about the first day at school. And the mother remains, as I said, the focal point in most of our destinies. And as I said, if she shapes my destiny, if she shapes your destiny, if she shapes everybody else's destiny, she also shapes the destiny of the world. The kind of people that inhabit this world depend on a lot on the kinds of mothers that we have. It's about nurture and about socialization. By nurture, I mean that I become a healthy infant, to a healthy child, to a healthy teenager, to a healthy adult. Socialization, she first teaches me the idea of right and wrong. She teaches me the idea of good and bad. She teaches me how to behave, how not to behave, what to do, what not to do, and so on and so forth. Meaning that she is such an integral part of my life that what I am is to a very, very large extent shaped by the hand that rocks the cradle. And because when I say me, I mean all of us. Not only us as Indians. By us, I mean the entire humankind, the entire humanity. And if entire humanity is shaped by the hand that rocks the cradle, very, very obviously, it makes the world a better place to live in, because it is a woman, and the mother more specifically, who teaches us compassion, who teaches us empathy, who teaches us understanding, and who finally shapes us. And as I said earlier, I am here not only talking about mother in the narrower sense. I have taken it to be broader, that anything that nurtures, anything that shapes us, anything that makes us comfortable, Mother Earth, Mother Nature, anything that we feel passionate about, motherland, the idea of patriotism, etc., all ultimately boil down to this. I would have taken my essay to a much broader level, that the whole idea of nurture, the whole idea of the word mother being used in a particular context, and brought it down to the idea of motherhood as we humans see it. And of course, most of these essays are about linking. This has to link with this, and about shaping destinies, shaping individual destinies, shaping people's destinies, thereby shaping the destiny of a nation, thereby shaping the destiny of the whole world. A very, very interesting topic, the second one: what is research but a blind date with knowledge? And again, the interconnection. Many of you who have studied science, many of you who have studied sociology, anthropology, etc., multiple subjects, research is a fundamental part of it, whether it is scientific research, whether it is social research in social sciences. And I know something, but I need to prove it or disprove it, is what research is about. That is how it connects to knowledge. Now, research is essentially to prove something or disprove something through analysis of through an empirical analysis of data, for example, in a very narrow meaning. Scientific data could be inanimate things like gases, like physical matter. In biological research, it could be human beings, it could be animals, plants and trees. In social research, it could be interactions. And yet, almost every research form follows a certain path, what we call a research method. How do I research into something? How do I select a topic? I form a question. Let's say take a particular a random question that forms in somebody's mind. Now, this is a question that forms in my mind. What do I do with this? How do I know whether it's true or false? I form what we call is a hypothesis. The hypothesis, from the language of the question, changes to a statement. The question formed in my mind was, is AI the future of the world? The hypothesis I formed is that AI is the future of the world. But again, that is not enough. I have to either prove it or disprove it. But how do I go about it? I do research. How? By studying existing material that is available on the subject, by collecting data, by talking to people who know of the matter, and so on and so forth. Based on this data, I arrive at certain conclusions. I revalidate the data. I talk to other people who are doing similar kind of research, and I arrive at a conclusion which either says yes or says no. If it says yes, I prove it further, and it becomes a theory. If it is disproved based on my research, then what happens? Then either I drop the idea or I undertake further research. Meaning, I have the knowledge that AI is there. I have the knowledge that somehow many people are talking about that it might be the future of the world. I have to research based on that knowledge, not knowing what conclusion I'll arrive at. It's like a blind date. You don't know who the person you'll be meeting. And this example applies to almost every kind of research that we might do. As I said, it can be social research, it can be scientific research, it can be biological research, it can be research with gases, it can be research with human beings, it can be with animals, and so on and so forth. Knowledge by itself is not enough. It has to be proved or disproved, as I said. How do you do it? By research. How do you research? By following what we call a research method. By raising a question, by converting it to hypothesis, by collecting data, by reading existing material, by talking to peers, by talking to other people who understand the thing, and thereby arrive ultimately at some kind of an answer that yes or no. I repeat, if it's yes, it might sooner or later become a theory. If it's a no, I have no option either to drop it or to undertake further research. I repeat, it's a blind date with knowledge because knowledge is there. But what the research will bring out based on that knowledge, I have no idea till I do the entire process of research following a research method. Now this essay again should not be very difficult where I am concerned. Now here we could maybe take this idea a bit further. Now information by itself is not enough. It's just a random collection of data. Whatever I read, whatever I remember, whatever figures, statistics I have is information. To make it useful, you need to convert it into knowledge. You have to learn to apply it. Knowledge plus experience is wisdom. Now we are talking here about knowledge, that is applied information, so to speak. But as I said, knowledge without proving or disproving remains incomplete. And if it remains incomplete, what do? I repeat, you undertake research. You undertake research based on what you know, but you do not know what the results will be. You do not know the direction in which you are heading. Now a blind date might turn into an everlasting friendship. A blind date can end there and then. A blind date can turn into a romantic relationship. A blind date can convert itself into a marriage. A blind date might not happen at all because the other person does not turn up, for example. The same is the connection between these two, one without the other. One is not enough. This can't happen without this, and this also can't increase without this. And yet, and now there are many examples that you could give of when people started a research into something and came up with something totally unexpected. That also happens in a blind date. Sometimes somebody is out to discover something and discover something else. That also happens in a blind date. That is why scientists form hypotheses, because they don't really know. They have to prove or disprove. That's what happens in a blind date. I personally believe a rather straightforward essay. Coming to the next one. To many people, though many people have said they would have attempted this essay, and yet I think this is one of the tricky ones. This is a statement by Karl Marx. Now, Marx was a conflict theorist. Now, history repeats itself is something that we have often heard. Rulers come and go. History is a cycle. History is a cycle. It does not stop. It has no beginning and no end. And there are many repetitions in such a long tradition of history. You can't escape the idea that it repeats itself. It certainly does. Maybe in different forms, in different places, in different times, in different settings. But history repeating itself is a very oft repeated quote. But why did Marx say that first as a tragedy, then as a farce? Now again, multiple interpretations to this one. But because it was Karl Marx, now assuming that you know it was Karl Marx, I would have taken a much broader view, assuming that you don't know Karl Marx. Is history about individuals? Is history about societies? Is history about kingdoms? Is history about nations and countries? Is history about the world? Now if you think of it, history is about each one of these. So the safer bet here would be to take the widest possible meaning, history in a very wide form. But if it repeats itself, why first as a tragedy? Now again, I am assuming that I don't know why Marx said it, how he said it. I don't even know, for example, that it was Karl Marx who said it. Now many people go back to history to validate themselves. The present does not validate me. What I am does not validate me. I take recourse to the past to validate me. Whether it's me as an individual, whether it's my religion, whether it's anything to do with me. And that is why Karl Marx says, again, I'm sorry, we'll forget Karl Marx for a while. That is why it is a tragedy, because right or wrong, we seek validation from the past. Many a times ignoring the present, many a time ignoring what we are, many a times ignoring that times have changed, settings have changed, people have changed, thought processes have changed, technology has changed, science has changed, philosophy has changed, everything has changed over time, and yet harking back to the past to seek validation. Now, many a times validation is sought by the ruling classes. Whether it is radical Islam, let's say Taliban, whether it is very radical Hindutva, whether it is very radical Christianity, etc. To go back to the past, for example, the Taliban in Afghanistan, saying that this is how things were thousands of years back, this is how things will be now. Some sections of radical Hindutva, again saying that, again sort of overturning the whole idea of history that we have learned throughout generations. Certain parts of radical Christianity, not only radical Christianity, but seeking validation in religion, is one part of history repeating itself as a tragedy. And as I said, I am taking a much broader view. I am talking about the ruling classes, for example. And not only the ruling classes, even at the individual level or as social groups, we tend to validate ourselves by taking recourse to the past, however right, however wrong it might be. That becomes immaterial. What becomes material is that I am validating my existence based on history, ignoring the right and wrong of it. History repeating itself would not be a bad idea. It's a value neutral thing. But when it becomes a crutch, without going into the rights and wrongs of it, it becomes a tragedy. And then as a farce. What's a farce? Farce is a sick joke, for example. Again, coming to the ruling classes, now if a ruling class takes validation that this is how it was, this is how it is, this is how it will be, meaning the tragedy has turned into a joke, a sick joke. The tragedy was that I was taking recourse to the past without worrying about the rights and wrongs of it. The farce or the sad joke is that I actually believe that I am doing the right thing. And nothing will explain to me that I am wrong. I may be wrong. I'm not that I am wrong, but I may be wrong. Meaning, selective repetition of history. Hitler killing Jews by some idea that Jews might have done some wrong at some point of time. The Christian crusades against the Muslims at one time. The Muslim reaction to the Western world at some point of time. The clash of civilizations, so to speak. The Islamic civilization with other religious civilizations. Maybe and in certain cases it becomes very, very visible. For example, in India, the recent trend of seeing Islam and Hinduism as binaries has a problem in itself. But it is tragic that we have taken recourse to the past without trying to understand history, that why certain things happened, because everything in history, remember, has a context. There can be no history without a context. If a king in the medieval period or the ancient period did something, there was a context to it. But I am reading that history from the context of the present, and thereby I am thinking that that man did something wrong, that that man was unethical, and so on and so forth. I have forgotten the context of history. History should be looked at from the context of the time in which it happened, not from my present time. But when the two merge, when I merge them deliberately, without even thinking about the right or wrong, is a tragedy. When I validate my actions, it becomes a sick joke. Because to me, after a point, nothing matters. Not the present, not who I am, who are others, not, as I said earlier, the context has changed, the times have changed, everything else has changed. And I have limited my this part of the essay to the ruling classes, how they validate themselves by doing what I have just said. I have also said that the same applies to social groups. Let's say very radical Islamists, very radical Hindutva, very radical Christian sects. They also validate what they do because of something they perceive happened in the past. Now they are repeating history because somebody did something to me in a particular context. Now I'll do something very similar to the other person in spite of the fact that the context has changed. That is the tragedy of history repeating itself. And I repeat, it becomes a farce where I actually start believing seriously that history, selective history, actually validates what I do. Everything that I do is right simply because history says so, and history, my perception of history, my selection of history. As I said, forget what Marx said, forget that even whether Marx said it or somebody else said it. This would have been my interpretation. Now I repeat before I go to the last essay that understanding will differ from person to person. But if you broadly get the meaning of the topic, if you broadly write following the UPSC guidelines, you will certainly get above average marks. That is for sure. The last topic here, very, very straightforward one. If I say something is the best, then I have no way forward. This is the end. Which means there can't be anything better than the best. And yet, there is a Japanese saying which says, there is always a better way of doing things. This is what is a Japanese saying, and that is why Japan is what it is today. They do not believe for a moment that they have arrived at the best, because the best to them is the end. Then research will stop, then thinking will stop, then acceptance will happen that whatever is there is the best. I need nothing more. I have done my best. Now, this idea is also applies to you people directly as aspirants, that I did my best, but I didn't get through. For example, there will be many, many people like that. But you forget that there is always a better way of doing things. And a better way can be a different way, can be the same thing done differently. Either you can do different things or you can do the same thing differently. And that is why there is always a better way of doing things. And that is why there are better practices to best practices. When we say best practices, even they evolve over time. New ideas come, new knowledge comes, new information comes, new research gets done, times change, context changes. That is why the best practice does not remain as it was, it changes over time. It is also contextual. It is also progressive. It is not static. A best practice needs to change with time to remain the best. But if I say, as I said earlier, that this is the best, that's it, that is the end of me, that is the end of me as a thinking human being, that is the end of civilization, that is also the end of progress. I would have made this essay revolve around the Japanese saying, or I would have, even if I didn't know this saying, I would have said that if I say something is the best, that is the end of thinking, that is the end of civilization, that is the end of me as a thinking human being. And the more we progress, the more we learn. The more we learn, the more we progress. It operates both ways. And that is why everything evolves over time. A very simple example would be technology. Now, technology has evolved over time simply because people refuse to believe that this is the best. Cameras at one time, you would have to put in a film, it had to be developed. Then we had Polaroid instant cameras. Now we don't need a camera, we need a phone. Now, if we had decided that the good old cameras were the best, nothing would have developed. If people thought that interacting with people across distances, the only way to do is through post, the telephone would not have developed. To take a broader meaning, if we had decided that what we do in disaster management is the best, the idea of disaster management from being responsive, from being reactive to being proactive would not have happened. And that is why I would have focused this essay. My last point again, that the best to me would mean the end of me as a thinking human being, of a civilization, because we would come to a standstill. That is why there is always a better way of doing things. Again, to me, fairly straightforward. And that is why, to end, many of these essays, they are not based on philosophy optional, they are not based on PSI or sociology, they are based on your understanding of the topic, whichever way you understand it. Unless you are wide off the mark, it's your understanding of the topic, following the UPSC guideline, writing in a logical manner, sticking to the topic, and explaining yourself well, with examples if you have good ones, without examples if you don't have any, depending on your writing skill. Because they are philosophical or oblique abstract essays, keep them as wide as possible. If you narrow down abstract essays, they become more practical. The whole idea of the abstract is completely lost. Best of luck, and thank you very much.